Picture this. It's 1995. Raves are raging, clubs are packed, and electronic music is exploding. But one track doesn't just fill the dance floors, it owns them. This isn't just a song, it's an anthem. A dark, hypnotic journey that taps in to our own personal, deepest sleepless nights. Faithless's Insomnia. A song that didn't just define a genre, it transcended it. Nearly 3 decades on, it still gives us goosebumps. But what makes it so timeless? How does a track with no conventional drop or chorus get 100,000 people or more moving together as one? Well, today we're peeling back the layers of Insomnia to uncover the secrets behind its iconic sound. From the haunting bass line and hypnotic synth to that hands in the air moment in the break, I'll show you the exact production techniques that make it unforgettable. And why is this useful? Because we can take some of these secrets and learn how to apply it in our own music to create something that's not just a hit, but that's truly timeless. So without further ado, let's hop into the door and get it done. Now we're going to build this from the ground up. I know that you want to get to the riff, and we are going to get that soon, but there's a lot more going on in this track that builds to that moment where the riff comes in. So first let's look at, I'd say, the most important element of this track, which is this haunting bass line. And there's something magical about this that makes it so dark and addictive. But it's more than just the sound itself, it's how Faithless created its drive and its pulse. It's really the heart of this track, so let's break it apart. So I'm going to dig into this, and what we're doing is we're bouncing along on the 16ths but just missing some of those notes. So in modern rolling bass line tracks you'll have a bass line that hits every 16th like this. But what Rollo and Sister Bliss did in this track is just leave some of those 16ths out, which allow this kind of more skippy feel to occur. Let's listen with the kick drum. Now you may have noticed there are a couple of notes which have lower velocity as well. So let's dig into the synth and see what's happened. Now, I've created this in Serum, but it really doesn't matter which synth you use for this. So let's break it down. I've got a saw wave, which I've added a little bit of decay and a short amount of sustain, and a little bit of release to make this thing a bit smoother. And then I've added a filter envelope as well. So that's with the filter off. And we can already hear it just gives that pulsing feeling. Now what's happening with this velocity is I've also assigned that to the cutoff and the level of these two different oscillators. So when there's a lower velocity, it's going to play these things slightly differently from when the velocity is at full. Just adds that movement. So let's add a second oscillator. So there's a sine wave an octave above, and then a sub oscillator, which is a sine wave an octave below, and that just gives it body. Allows you to feed in the sub bass. And it's as simple as that. So now let's get on to one of the parts of the track which really confuses a lot of producers. And no, it's not the main riff yet, but it is very recognizable, and it's this Detroit style techno stab that almost sounds like the synth is breathing. Which sounds so cool, especially with everything else in, but we'll get to that in a second. So this is what's known as a sampled chord, and you could listen to a lot of techno music back from the late 80s and the early 90s, and that also employs the same technique, as did rave music. And what it is when you sample a chord being played, and then you just play that chord on one note on different notes on the piano. Now, it sounds a bit confusing, so let me show you. What we're gonna do is create a stab synth, and I've just used Serum again, and let's break this apart and see what's going on. So I'm going to start off again with a saw wave and just program it so I've got full sustain and a bit of decay and a little bit of release. Kind of like a similar shape to a piano when you hit it, so it doesn't just stop straight away. Now, the trick here is to play a minor chord in the key you're working in. Now, this track is in B minor, so I'm just going to play the B minor chord like this. But that sounds completely different from this Detroit techno stab. Let's have a listen and compare. Right, how is that even the same? Well, the trick all lies in with a bandpass filter. So we've got our minor chord. Now what I'm going to do is add a second oscillator. And then add a filter. And you can see I've chosen bandpass here. So it's taking out the low frequencies and the high frequencies. There we go. But what I'm going to do is bump up the resonance. That's getting a bit loud and painful. So it creates this slightly ringing sound just at that frequency point, and then you can choose whichever point you want. Like, that sounds pretty cool to me. Now I'm going to go over into the effects, and I'm just going to add a little bit of reverb. And I'm going to add a second filter, a formant filter. And what this creates is a kind of organ type sound. Almost like breathing. And now what we can do is sample this. So I'm going to create an audio channel like this. And I'm going to take the input from my stab track. So let's go stab. And I'm just going to record this one chord stab. So let's just do that. I'm going to go record. So we can get rid of this stab now. So we've just got the audio. Let's bump up the volume a little bit. So we've just got this one chord that has been recorded like this. Now, the magic comes when you throw that into a sampler. So I'm going to cut off the front because I don't need that. I'm just going to have it start right where I hit it. I'm going to consolidate that. So that's where the sample now starts. And now what I'm going to do is create a MIDI channel, get a sampler, like so. Oh, I'm excited. Come on, get that sampler. Where are you, boy? Let's just put that on there. And then I'm going to drag this audio clip into that sampler. And now listen to this. Taxi. Oh my goodness. And now listen to this. Which is exactly how techno and rave music was made. Now, when you've brought that in, you can start adding, play it an octave above and an octave below, put a little bit of reverb on that. You could even filter more of it out if you really wanted. Put another bandpass on there, but let's leave it like this at the moment. And that's exactly what we've done. And I've created a bit of a better one here. Huh? Sounds good, right? With the kick and the bass. Oh, spot on. So now we're starting to build that moody vibe. Everything's working towards that same feeling. Okay, what's on my magic list? Next thing is the drums. So we're going to go, I'll just reorder that, to my drums in here. And we're going to pick this apart as well. Now, like a lot of music in that era, it just used simple 909 drum sounds and then layered some other samples underneath it. We've got a 909 open hat from the TR-909 drum machine, and we've got a closed hat too. So if we silence all of the other drums for the time being, this is what we've got. So the closed hat is playing on every beat, and then there's an open hat playing in between each one. And what I've also done is pan some of these drums left and right. So with our kick and our bass, very simple. But in my opinion, the real magic in this track happens when these skippy beats come in after the first break. Now, I suspect that Faithless used some kind of drum loop and layered it underneath, but I actually wanted to build this up just using separate samples. So let's go to a part where I've actually done that and listen to these other sounds I've used. We've got a shaker, panned left. We've got a finger snap that I just got from Splice. We've got a clap snare. And we've got another clap snare as well. And a second open hat. So this careful layering really just adds texture. And if you look carefully, I've actually moved a few of these drums just off the grid. Because the finger snap kind of has two snaps happening really close to each other, I've put it just before the beat, so you've got this pre-transient. And with the closed hats, I've moved some of those slightly off the grid, so we're adding our own groove. You can do that using the groove pool, but I wanted to do this manually. Similarly with the snare, I've got the snare skip point here. And if you've gone through music theory for EDM producers, you'll know about the snare skip points. So now let's start feeding in these extra drums one at a time and hearing the difference that it makes. So we'll start with our basics. Add the shaker. A little bit of reverb on that finger snap. And now for the skippy bits. and the extra hi-hat. So all together, you're starting to get that really skippy feel that was prominent in the early 90s and can really be heard in any house music nowadays as well. Now the piece de la resistance that makes this drum loop really special is this classic rave hit that I've got. I can't remember where I got this from. It's probably from a Loletta Holloway record, or maybe it's sampled from a James Brown record, but check out what's going on. It's someone going woo. Simple as that. And what I've done is just shortened it, and I've warped it to make it a bit shorter so it happens quicker. And then it just adds this tonal layer that brings a real moody magic to the drums. Now listen. With the bass line. Oh, with the Detroit stab. Oh, see, this is really important, building up to that all-important riff that we're going to get to very shortly. The last thing I'm going to add to this section though, let's just delete these unneeded channels, is this track is written in the scale of B minor. So what we've done is added some strings that are just going to hint at a really dark, moody feeling. So let's have a listen to the strings. Now what makes these really special is that if we hit the scale mode in Ableton and we choose B minor as our scale, you would expect to hit the scale button and only have notes from within that scale showing. But if we look here, the very first note is a D sharp. And if we look at the notes in this scale, so the first 5 notes of this scale are no D sharp. And yet that is a D sharp, and that is using a note from the parallel scale. So that's actually taking a note from the scale of B major, not B minor. And that adds this really sinister sound to this. And then we switch back to the scale of B minor natural. Oh, such a vibe. Okay. Now we're going to get onto the all-important riff. You know what, this is such an iconic track. I want you to let me know in the comments, is there any memory that you associate with this track? Any fantastic club night you had or party with your friends? For me, personally, it was probably DJing at one of my first gigs, dropping this track and just having the party go off. It's still an absolute party weapon. So yeah, let me know in the comments. Now, of course, we don't have Max's vocals. I don't want to do the man any disrespect, and rest in peace, Maxi. But the lyrics that we used in this track really just work perfectly with that whole introspective, sinister, nighttime, insomniac feeling. His poetry and lyrics were fantastic, as well as the timbre of his voice, and everything came together to create something absolutely magic. So I'm not going to try and recreate his vocals, as I said, out of respect for both him and you guys, because I don't want you to suffer that. So let's just listen to the instrumental. So we're building in to the main break where the riff plays, and it sounds something like this. Oh, getting goose pimples already. Okay, and now we've got to the main riff that you've all been waiting for. But before we do that, let me know if you're enjoying this so far in the comments below. Give me a hell yeah or an amen, brother, if you're feeling holy, and let's do it. Now, the secret to this, which has eluded so many producers, is that Sister Bliss used a patch from a Roland JD800 hardware synth. And the only way I found out how to recreate this is to use the actual plugin that Roland has released of that synth. Now, I tried recreating something in Serum similar, and then I did a search online, like closest Insomnia Serum patch, and then I found a website that had this patch, and I downloaded it, and then I realized it was the patch that I had made, that someone had stolen and uploaded. But, you know, whatever, I like sharing stuff. And it sounded okay, but if you've got this plugin, there's nothing else that's going to come close. So I'm going to select it with my MIDI keyboard. You recognize that, right? And let's jam this in on the keyboard. Ooh, that sounds exactly the same as the original. So I programmed that in MIDI, so you can grab this as well. You can download this project file, but check this out. We'll go in and see why it works so well. I know Sister Bliss played this, but what we've done is we programmed it in and we've created this syncopated pattern. So if we play this under the kick drum, we'll hear that these notes just dance around. It's all dancing around the kick, and that's the beauty of syncopation in dance music. So important. But let's tweak this and make it a bit more Faithlessy. So what I've done is I actually created an auxiliary reverb as well. A whole reverb with quite a long decay. So this is without the reverb on. Sounds really dry, right? I think there's a little bit of delay like in the patch itself. But now let's feed out to this auxiliary channel reverb and listen to the difference it makes. And I added an EQ and just boosted the top end a little bit and took out the low end. So good. And now we get to the main high riff. So after it plays through there on that lower octave, she actually added in another octave of those chords above, and that's when things get really intense. But rather than play it now, I'm going to do a little bit more work on this, and then we're going to run through the finished result. Then, after running through the final result, we're going to break down the lessons that we can learn from this and use in your music. So let's do it. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So nice. You can hear the other drums I've added in, some reverse cymbals, a little bit of reverse piano just before that drop. All these careful layers are so important. Okay, now we're going to get to the break. Well, not quite the break, but taking it down before the break. Here we go. Oh, the sweat, the lasers, the euphoria. Let's bring some drums back in as a teaser. Okay, we're going to get to the drop, then we'll go through those lessons. So good. Thank you, Sister Bliss. Thank you, Maxi Jazz. Thank you, Rollo, and everyone else involved in this track. But let's look at the lessons we've learnt and what we can apply to our own music. So, lesson number 1 from Faithless. Vibe is king. Everything about this track goes towards fulfilling that dark, insomniac vibe, from the lyrics to the bass line, to the drum groove, to the Detroit stabs, to the strings. Everything is pushing in that one direction, and that's what people are able to relate to. Just imagine you were watching a movie and it was like an adventure movie, but then it threw in a whole bunch of other genres in there as well, and it would just confuse you. So once you've picked a vibe and you've got an emotional message, make sure everything works towards that direction. Lesson number 2 is the sound selection. Kind of a corollary, I guess, of Secret 1, but the careful layering and these small sounds that to the layman you might not hear, but they just add this wonderful atmosphere, like the little whoops, like the little synths in the background that are barely audible but just really add depth and richness to the production. And number 3 is the storytelling. The arrangement of this track really is part of the magic. There's no huge hook, there's no huge chorus, there's no massive vocal, but the riff on its own wouldn't work so well if you didn't have the dark, kind of moody bit beforehand. And then it's almost like the clouds open and the sun shines through, and that's the moment where everyone throws their hands in the air. You've got to have that storytelling through your track. Now, these lessons are really going to help, but if you want to develop them further, you can check out our Accelerator program below this video, and don't forget you can download this project file as well. I'll sample the riff just in case you don't have the Rollo plugin, which I suspect most people won't, but if you do want the exact sound, then check out out the plugin. Now, as I said, this was a request from you guys, so let me know in the comments what track, what absolute classic banger do you want to see me break apart and analyze on this channel. Do let me know in the comments below, and in the meantime, you might want to check out my track breakdown there of Stardust's Music Sounds Better With You. It was one of my most well-received videos, and if you enjoyed this one, I'm sure you'll like that too. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you over at that next video.